What I've learned through this entire process is that mindfulness, I believe, is the essence and the first step of behavioral change. That is obviously really interesting for me as I help people change their behavior. But I guess before we go down that route, Ed, it would be good, maybe could you kind of really clarify what is mindfulness? So, welcome to the podcast. I'm joined by Ed, who is my mindfulness coach. We'll go more into how I know Ed and how that came to fruition. But first, Ed, why don't you introduce yourself? Who are you? Where do you live? What do you do? And why do you do it?
As you said, my name's Ed Halliwell. I'm based in Mid Sussex in the UK, and I teach mindfulness in all sorts of different settings. I teach public courses for people who, for some reason or another, are interested in mindfulness and have found me. Both in person and online. I work with organizations who want to bring mindfulness into their culture in various ways. And I also work individually, so work with people one-to-one to help them develop mindfulness and hopefully kind of accrue the benefits in their daily lives. So it's quite a wide-ranging brief. I also supervise other mindfulness teachers as well, and sometimes teach retreats.
Nice. And I haven't asked you this question, but how did you actually get into mindfulness coaching?
Yeah, well, how long have you got?
We've got time.
It really started for me in my 20s. So I'm now 50. So this was kind of, just under 30 years ago. And I started to experience increasing episodes of anxiety, usually related to life changes. Had no sense of really why this was happening, and more to the point, what to do about it. So I had a number of these episodes and kind of sort of just muddled my way through them as best I could, without really getting any support. But I hit a real wall in my late 20s, and at the time I was working as a journalist, and so I was using my head a lot, not very connected with the rest of my being, and I was living a really fast-paced lifestyle, and quite a hedonistic lifestyle, and I just hit this wall where it just wasn't working anymore, and I basically collapsed. Not physically collapsed, but stopped being able to function. And that meant, not being able to do my job. And so it really was a place of desperation that I reached, because I had no idea really what to do about it. And that was the point that I started kind of opening up to the possibility of investigating what was going on in my mind and body, initially with the help of a psychotherapist, and doing a lot of reading, which was not particularly helpful, to be honest, because of course what I did was try to sort out my problem with my head. So I try and sort of cram my head full of knowledge about mental health and well-being. But it was a bit like trying to learn how to swim by reading a book about swimming. And I literally had piles of books kind of just sort of stacked up in my bedroom. So that didn't help very much. But what it did do is it pointed me towards meditation. So many times in these books, it was suggested that meditation could be a good way of letting go of these tendencies to try to be constantly trying to achieve goals and kind of fix myself, which is really what I wanted to do. And in meditation, so I went to a local meditation center. This is before there were mindfulness courses, sort of widely.
Before.
Yeah. And so if you wanted to learn meditation, you kind of went to your local meditation center, which is usually a Buddhist meditation center. What I learned there was different from all of the other approaches that I had taken, in that it was the first time that I was really practically shown how to stop and look at my mind directly and to see what was going on. So not just theoretically to kind of think about what was going on, which was just more thinking, more kind of mental struggle, but actually to stop and look and to see how actually it was the pattern of my mind itself and what it was trying to do, including recovery from anxiety and the depression that came with it, that was actually the problem. So what happened is that whilst it was kind of life changes that had kind of triggered my episode, what was keeping it going were my desperate attempts to get better, in that my mind was just continually struggling to get to some sort of ideal version of myself, which was like a recovered self. But actually that was just creating more stress because I wasn't there, and I didn't know how to get there. And what meditation did was enabled me to have a bit like a mirror to myself, and see that these patterns of struggle and striving, and I've got to get better and I've got to fix this, and what's the answer, actually wasn't the answer. And gradually I learned how to, whilst initially it was very difficult because what I saw was this racing mind, and a lot of pain in my body. By learning how to stay with that and sit with that, gradually I developed the skills of letting go and letting be into what was happening, and that lessened the struggle. So actually recovery came from me for the first time anyway, and it wasn't like a sort of single moment, but there was a single moment where it happened, when I just allowed myself to have 10 days where I didn't work. I mean, I didn't know it was going to be 10 days. I thought it was going to be like forever, because it was just about 2.5 to 3 years of this cycle. And I just finally gave up and said, I can't do it anymore. I'm just going to stay at home, and I don't know how, don't know what's going to happen, but I can't do this anymore. I can't keep trying. And after 10 days of that, just literally just resting and having no goal, and assuming that this might be the way it was going to be for a very long time, I had this moment in the bath where my anxiety disappeared.
Wow.
And that was the first sort of sense of, oh, hang on a minute, something's happened here. It's very different from the way my mind had been before. So that was kind of what inspired me to continue on this journey of meditation, which eventually led to me becoming a mindfulness teacher many years later.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, obviously we've never discussed that before. Really interesting to see how you came to that conclusion. And in a lot of ways, I can kind of relate to your story in some ways, because what I haven't yet shared kind of on social media is exactly why I have been having mindfulness coaching. But yeah, I never was someone to suffer from anxiety or panic attacks or anything like that. And I had multiple friends who did and could never relate. I was always a bit in that frame of mind of, oh, you just need to relax and breathe. And obviously breathing can help, but it's certainly not as simple as that, as, your story just described. And then basically a few things happened, primarily at the start of this year. My grandfather passed away, and that was quite a shocking experience. I've never really had a lot of death in my life, which is, really fortunate thing. But I was with him for the last kind of 10 days, and it was, waiting for him to die, basically. And obviously that was really challenging and really difficult, but nothing kind of out of the ordinary. You'd expect that situation to be challenging. And then I kind of got home, back to France, was on a coaching call, and had this experience where something went pop in my brain. And at that moment, all of a sudden, I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was looking at, didn't know who I was talking to, and then kind of panicked about it. And managed to almost had a full-blown panic attack on a call with a coaching client. She would have been absolutely fine, but I was kind of in the mind of, I cannot show this. I need to finish the call. And I managed to string a few sentences together and finish the call. And I don't think she noticed. But then I had these experiences of, which I now, in hindsight, know, derealization and depersonalization. It felt like I'd taken some hallucinogenic drugs, and it just, nothing looked real. Very different, very difficult to explain. And then basically off the back of that, I was panicking about it. I was like having these catastrophic thoughts of, what is this? I'm stuck like this forever. I can't do my job. I can't do the speech at the funeral. I'm not going to be able to get married. And literally visualizing my life falling to bits. And
that must have been very frightening.
Yeah, it was very frightening. And I think what I now know in hindsight, having learned from you and the therapist that I had, is the issue wasn't necessarily the derealization that I was experiencing. It was the reaction to the derealization, which was then perpetuating this cycle of panicking and anxiety. Fortunately, we do live in a world now where talking about this kind of thing is much more out in the open. And I basically had a chat with our mutual friend, not going to name her, who straight away was like, look, what you're experiencing is completely normal. It's going to come and go in waves. And you should, get some professional help as quickly as you can. And that was great advice, because straight away I was able to actually let go, a bit like, what you described in that moment in the bath. Is after 3 or 4 years, you finally kind of let go. But fortunately, I managed to kind of do that much quicker. And really made me think as well, like, lots of people must suffer with this in silence. And I think more so for men. Men are sometimes afraid to reach out and talk. But fortunately, that wasn't the case for me. And I saw a therapist first, which was really useful. And then obviously ended up kind of progressing onto working with yourself, which again has really built on everything that I've learned. And, I think the one thing that I went into, especially with a therapist, I went in being like, how can I fix this? How long is this going to take for me to fix? Give me some really practical things that I can do to fix it. Because that's just kind of how my brain works. How can I complete this task? And first thing he said, which was useful advice, which was, well, firstly, we need to maybe accept that you might never fix this. And really, what we might be able to do is get you to be okay with that. Initially, that was quite scary, but obviously that's exactly what happened. I'm not fixed per se. I still have symptoms and experiences in certain situations, but through the journey that I've been on, learning with you, I've developed coping strategies, and ultimately the reaction I had to those symptoms is completely different now. And the reaction is actually a thing that helps me work through it. And really what I've learned through this entire process is that mindfulness, I believe, is the essence and the first step of behavioural change. That is obviously really interesting for me as a behavioural. I help people change their behaviour. But I guess before we go down that route, Ed, it would be good. Maybe could you kind of really clarify what is mindfulness? Obviously, we've been talking about it quite a lot here. People might have an idea of what it is, but yeah, could we get your definition of mindfulness?
Yeah. Well, I like your insight that mindfulness can be the first step towards behavior change. However, many of us are kind of acclimatized to this kind of fix it kind of approach towards behavioral change. We identify something that we want to be different, and we say, how do I get there? Which is kind of makes a lot of sense, and it works for a lot of aspects of our lives. If you want to fix a car, what do I need to do? I'll take it to the garage, or if I'm skilled myself, I need to play about with these bits, we make something happen and change happens. But that doesn't work so well when it comes to our inner life, when it comes to our emotions, when it comes to our thoughts, kind of the automatic thoughts that we have coming up within us that maybe we're not totally in control of. And just as we're not totally in control of our emotions, particularly as they arise in the present moment, we have habit patterns. And so mindfulness offers a different way of relating to those experiences which can't be changed just by struggle and that kind of fix it mode. And so what it offers is first of all, that a way of relating to the experience that's coming up that doesn't then perpetuate this struggle and striving to reach an ideal self. So imagine this can come up quite a lot when it comes to working with working with weight. I want to be this, I want to be like that. How do I get there? Which makes total sense, and it's not like that's necessarily a bad thing, because if we didn't have that sense of where do I want to get to, then we'd probably not get out of bed in the morning. So it's important to have some sense of direction. The problem is that as you've described, and I experienced too, when this is applied to what's happening within us, what we do is we identify, how do I want to feel? Oh, I want to feel great. I want to feel not anxious. I want to not have these derealization symptoms. I want them to go away. And so we identify how we'd like to be, and then we look at it and go, oh, I'm not there. And so there's this kind of gap that appears between how I want to be and how I am. And then our mind starts ruminating about, well, must need to do this, or I must need to do that. And so we speed up in our heads often, and we get this sense of tension, which is a kind of a signal of, I'm not where I want to be. This is a threat. I don't want to feel like this. So all of our threat systems are then activated. And so that attempt to try and get there starts to backfire, and we become more stressed, and we maybe experience more symptoms. And so it self-perpetuates. When it comes to eating and kind of weight, working with weight, it might lead us then to feel worse, and then to eat more, and then to feel guilty, and then to eat more, and then to want to, become somebody else and eat more, and et cetera, et cetera. So what mindfulness offers is a way of actually meeting our experience, of looking at these patterns through mindfulness practices, through meditation practices particularly, to actually see how this pattern unfolds. And by becoming familiar with it, actually already we've stepped out of that habit pattern, because we're no longer caught in it, we're watching it. Now that's difficult to do, because it means letting go. And I don't know about you, but I was never taught how to let go. In fact, during my, period of the really long period of anxiety that I had, many people said, "Ed, you just need to let go," a bit like you just need to relax and breathe. And that's true. But it's like, okay, but how? Like, you need to relax. Yeah, but how? So what for me, and for a lot of people, mindfulness is the how. Mindfulness offers this way of relating to our experience by looking at it, by learning how to let things be, as a skill, not just as an idea, but as an actual skill we can practice over and over again. So when our mind wanders away in meditation, we see it and we gently come back, and we don't try to change our experience. We learn how to say, I'm going to hold this. I'm going to with kindness and gentleness, breathe with this. And over time, learning that these kinds of experiences, although they're within us and although they might not be pleasant, they are workable most of the time. They might not be what we want, but actually struggling to get away from what we want when it comes to these inner experiences that can't be changed by struggle. Actually, it's this mode of learning how to accept that transforms our experience. So ironically, acceptance becomes the first step to change. So just what you said, mindfulness then becomes the first step to behavior change. So it's the way we meet our experience that is that first behavior change before we get into what do I want to be different.
Yeah, I think that's something I've noticed firsthand with a lot of my clients. Is initially I kind of take this down this route of mindfulness and really awareness. And that's kind of what I mean by the first step is if you're not aware that you're feeling in a certain way, and that leads to a certain reaction, it can be quite difficult to then potentially change that reaction if you aren't aware of the problem in the first place. Once clients are suddenly aware, they're like, oh, I shouldn't feel like this. I shouldn't feel stressed. I shouldn't care about the number on the scale. I shouldn't feel this. I shouldn't feel this. And then it kind of leads into this pattern of negative self-talk, which is a problem for them, a lot of them anyway. And really what I have learned, and obviously I'm not an expert, this is just from my personal experience, is the issue isn't the negative feeling that you might have, it's the reaction to it. So this is what kind of you're saying is acknowledge that feeling that you're having, meet it, address it, and don't try and fight it. And then perhaps there can be a different reaction off the back of it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, indeed. It's the reactivity to, whether it's thoughts that we'd rather not be having, or judgments that come up that we make about ourselves, or feelings that we'd rather not be having that we want to therefore push away or get out of. By coming to, as you say, first of all, to recognize them, to see the patterns, to then become conscious of what it is that's driving our habit patterns, and by accepting them as they are in the moment. Yeah. So this doesn't mean resignation and kind of that we say, okay, well, nothing's ever going to change. What we're saying is accepting them in the moment so that we can learn this different relationship of being with them, which is a relationship of friendliness. So actually, it's often not what people expect, because they'll come to mindfulness, just as I did, and just as a lot of people do, to have less negative thoughts and to have nice feelings, pleasant experiences, to feel good rather than feeling bad. And actually to learn that the first step is to get to know the experiences we're having, which might mean actually, approaching the feeling bad and the judgments and the negative self-talk with a quality of friendliness is not what people expect, and might say, oh, I don't want to become friends with that. But actually it's only through befriending ourselves as we are, because we're all human. We all inherit these patterns of relating because they have been good for our survival as a species. They have their benefits, but it's just that what's good for survival is not necessarily good for well-being. And once, if survival is not the issue, but well-being is the issue, then maybe we need something else, a different approach. So this accepting and befriending and allowing actually our experience to be as it is in the moment then becomes the first step, because that frees up a lot of energy that perhaps would be being given to fighting what's going on or wishing it to be different, and enables us then to start to work with it rather than against it.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And you use the example of kind of negative self-talk there. And that is a problem that I know a lot of people struggle with. And a lot of the clients I work with struggle with it. And often that if it's left unaddressed, negative self-talk is the kind of thing that can sabotage results in the long term. So I know this, you're going to be able to properly go into the full detail of how you can address negative self-talk, but what would you say to someone who's listening to this right now that suffers from negative self-talk? How can they address it to potentially improve the situation, improve the the experience they're having with it.
Yeah. Well, maybe the first step is to recognize that you're not alone, that we are all human and we have evolved to judge and criticize as a way of making sure things are okay. So it is a good survival strategy to be continually checking, is what I'm doing all right? We've evolved to be a social species. So it makes sense to be continually checking, am I okay in the group? What do people think of me? Am I doing well enough? And then from that, well, maybe I'm not doing well enough. So I should be better. Or I should be, whatever it is. I should be slimmer. I should be more accomplished at, my job. I should be, whatever, the usual shoulds. Yeah.
Yeah.
To step out of that. But all of these practices can help us to come back to our bodies. So a lot of the work is about returning to the body where we are, the body's always in the present moment. The body is always in sensory experiencing. So the body can be a great ally to come back to. And gradually kind of learning experientially rather than just theoretically how this being human is as an inner experience, and therefore how we can learn to anchor ourselves through paying attention, say, for example, to the breath, bring kindness to ourselves by coming back, for example, from, the wandering mind, which we all have, not with a sense of judgment, but with a sense of friendliness. So I'd say mindfulness offers these range of practices, but they are all kind of helping to cultivate kindness, self-compassion, to cultivate presence, steadiness, curiosity, and to let go of the usual modes of judging and striving, so that we can actually move forward moment by moment.
Yeah, for me, I've seen real power and benefits in the meditation itself. And I've done different forms of meditation in the past. What I also find powerful of mindfulness is how to then apply that to day-to-day life. I feel that what I've learned from you is a bit more practical than just meditation by itself. Meditation kind of gives you the skill of being able to recognize thoughts and feelings and emotions, but then knowing what to do with that on a day-to-day basis, I think is also really important.
I wonder if you can give any examples of that, because it'd be really helpful perhaps to, for people listening, because yes, we might know what meditation is, but the sense of actually then applying what we learn in meditation to everyday life, how that can happen if you're able to.
Yeah, I guess one thing that I've started doing is kind of off the mat meditation, as it were, where I'm kind of consciously listening to the thoughts that are popping into my head just when I'm doing day-to-day things. And I've had this discussion with a few different people, and it seems that different, and I didn't realize this, and you wouldn't think this unless you spoke to someone else, but obviously everyone has a different background set of thoughts that are bombarding them on a day-to-day basis. And for a lot of people, it's negative self-talk, and that can lead to certain behaviors and certain reactions in certain situations. That's not something I can relate to at all. That's not something I've ever struggled with. But what I noticed was that it was the background thoughts for me are, this needs to be completed. What's the gap between where I am now and some task that needs to be finished? If I don't do this, I'm not going to be able to do this. If this doesn't happen, then this is really bad. And it's just nonstop. And what I learned, so yes, my grandfather passed away, but really that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, because really the underlying problem was the fact that I run my own business, and that can be challenging and lots of pressure. But when combined with renovating the house that I'm currently living in, and basically seeing there's all these things that need to be done everywhere all the time, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back, basically.
Yeah, it's like a perfect storm, isn't it?
Perfect storm.
And we are not superhuman. Yeah, so given enough stressors, whether those are external stressors or internal stressors, or most likely both, we will reach a point where our bodies and the systems that are kind of in place to try and cope with stresses becomes overloaded. Quite common that, that's when people will often seek help. But if we can learn how to, we may not be able to, we don't have total agency over our lives, So, we are working with the inner world that we have. And as you were saying, people have different patterns of thinking that causes problems, but we have some agency over how we relate with that. And then we have some agency over how we relate with our external lives as well. So
Yeah.
by cultivating it, by doing what you were doing, noticing, what are the patterns that drive me?
Yeah.
And for you, it sounds like it's kind of like that sense of being future based, of I've got to get here.
Yeah.
Which
Never in the present moment.
Yeah, never in the present moment. And of course, then by having that goal of where do I want to be, that creates tension in the body. We have this perhaps sense of being driven. And so we don't get rest. And so if we don't get rest, then the body doesn't recuperate. And then when those external stresses ramp up, we get overloaded.
Yeah.
So that's when kind of the system breaks down in some way, or throws up symptoms that show us that, hey, this is an alarm here. We've got to do something. It says we've got to do something, whereas actually it's that doing something that causes some of the problems. So of course the alarm is related to fight or flight, but when the issue is actually inside of us, or something to do with our present moment situation that can't be changed, then actually it's learning how to undo that is the way through this.
And really what I learned with you is actually that the habit I have of always wanting to complete tasks and get things done is really probably why I've done well, I think, with my business and quitting finance and going down this route. I wouldn't be able to do the job I do without that there. And I think you, instead of me seeing this as a bad thing and I shouldn't feel it, it's like, oh, actually, this is kind of a superpower in some ways, but if left unchecked, it can potentially cause problems. And especially like with what happened with the house, it was just this scenario of everywhere that I looked, it was a problem. And I wasn't aware that I had this problem. Whereas now I have that awareness, those exact same thoughts and feelings are there all the time. That default background of thinking of I need to fix this, I need to do this is still there. But now I've changed my relationship to it, and I've got better at asking myself the question, do I actually need to do that? Is the world going to end if I don't do that? And 9 times out of 10, the world is not going to end and I don't need to do it. And then I don't. And that's immediately kind of taking the pressure off myself.
Well, that's really fantastic and really important and helpful, I think, for people to see that it's actually, what you're paying attention to and how you're paying attention to what you experience, and discovering that we can actually live with our habit patterns, and that indeed they're hugely useful. That's how they've evolved to stay with us. So that we can have agency in our lives and make choices and run businesses, and that's excellent. It's just when it becomes a tyranny of thinking, we're then not in control of it, just runs
reacting
away. Because it's been so successful, probably we go, well, great, this is going really well, so it's almost like it then take over everything else and make that go really well. It's not suited to working with certain kinds of issues. So if we can learn how to regulate what mode of mind we are invested in each moment, then we can find a balance. So mindfulness isn't about, getting rid of that. It's about learning how to hold it and how to let go of it when it's not appropriate for the situation. It'll still be whirring away in the background, but to give ourselves a break from that.
Yeah. And really, this is why I've become so fascinated with mindfulness, and why I talk a lot about it on the program that I work with the clients, because we've talked a bit about negative self-talk, we've talked about how it's impacted my life, but really what I see with the people that I work with at the start of their journey is they are running on autopilot. They are reacting to life and making the same mistakes over and over again, and they don't necessarily realize it. And in some ways, it's a good thing that we have this capacity to run on autopilot, because if we had to consciously think about every single thing that we did repeatedly on a day-to-day basis, we get nothing done, So in some ways, it's a human being superpower that I can't remember the statistic, but supposedly 70% of daily tasks are automated. They are habits. And how I describe it is ultimately those automatic behaviors, those habits will either allow you to become the best version of yourself, or a steady and slow decline with your physical and mental health. So this idea of suddenly becoming aware of what the automatic default behaviors are in certain situations, changing your relationship to them, and then potentially coming up with different reactions in certain situations can help you shift from one set of automatic behaviors to a different set of automatic behaviors.
Yeah, life would be very confusing actually if we woke up without any autopilot, because we'd be faced with a world that we'd have no reference points for.
Yeah.
We'd have no language for it. It would be impossible to do anything. We'd be sort of helpless as a baby. And until we've learned kind of like how the world works through experience, we have no agency at all. So it is hugely helpful and enables us to, focus on the things we want to focus, rather than spending every day relearning how to put our clothes on.
Tie shoelaces.
Tie our shoelaces, yeah. Learn to drive, any skill that we've learned that's become an autopilot, if we had to relearn it every time we did it, it would be very frustrating. So yeah, it's hugely helpful, but it's only helpful when, as you've suggested, when what we have learned is actually appropriate for the situation. And of course, life is continually changing. So maybe what we've learned that might have been the most appropriate response to one situation earlier on in our life may no longer be helping us. If we can bring awareness to our experience, particularly perhaps when it's not working for us, then yeah, we can start to develop new habits. We can start to experiment with different behaviors that over time can become the new habits. But that's likely to be uncomfortable at first because it's not unfamiliar, and there will be the drive to do things the way we've learned to do them, because that's the way habits work. So it means working with discomfort, and it means finding the commitment to practice these new habits over and over again, not as ideas, not as shoulds that we have to make happen, but rather as direct experiences, because it's actually only through engaging in direct experiences that we learn new habits. You can't learn the piano by reading a book about it or thinking about it. It has to be an engagement with the instrument, over and over again, and we learn slowly. So the same with, skills that we want to learn in everyday lives. It has to be a process of gradual practice, and if we're not aware of what we're doing, or we're caught up in thinking about it, there's no space for that to happen.
And I guess all of this potential improvement and change needs to come from a place of, I believe it's possible to change the way I react. And some of the issues that I come across, not necessarily with clients, because obviously for them to become a client, they fundamentally believe it's possible for them to change.
Yeah.
But I know there are many people I speak to on a monthly basis who need the help, and I have all the capacity to completely transform their lives in every aspect, and in ways they can't even visualize, but they fundamentally believe it's not possible for them to change. Have you ever worked with anyone like that? They've been kind of pushed into like maybe doing some mindfulness, but they don't believe it's possible for them to change their situation. Have you worked with someone like that, and what would you say to that person?
It's very difficult, because if you don't think that mindfulness is likely to help you, if you're kind of strongly invested in a self that can't change, then that's probably going to be reinforced. So it is very, very difficult. I think there does need to be a degree of willingness to experiment and to kind of find the chink in the armor of that kind of strongly held identity of I'm the self that can't change.
Yes.
Fortunately, most people, as like with you, people aren't generally going to contact me if they don't believe that I'm going to help. Now, of course, as you say, it does sometimes happen that people will, kind of push people in my direction. But generally speaking, people don't want to be pushed, So even if they come and have a conversation with me, chances are there is a chink in that armor. So I suspect that those people won't actually reach me, and they won't reach you either. I'm not sure that there's any way of making it happen, except perhaps the power of everyone who does believe there's a possibility of learning it. And then, like with you, you're sharing this is something that's actually helped you. And so that's really powerful for people to kind of create that chink of, look, this can work. And I suppose the only thing I would say is that part of this process of habit making is that we come to be invested in an idea of a self that we are, because it's a lot easier not to change, not to, to sort of, there's a certain comfort in saying, well, I'm like this, I can't become any different. It means that there's no effort, there's no work to be done. And so it's kind of a comfortable place, although it might be in another way a very uncomfortable place. So there's a certain sense of kind of like moving out of that sense of safety. But the reality is that we're all continually changing all the time. Our experience is continually shifting who we are. You look back at yourself 20 years ago, you're not the same person, I would bet. There's clear, clearly we're all getting older. We're all learning different things in different ways. We have skills that we didn't have. We maybe have habits that we didn't have. Whether
change is
for
inevitable,
the good or not, change is inevitable. So it's simply not true that we're going to be the same self in 20 years' time that we are now. So the question is not, are we going to change, but how are we going to? Now,
that's
of
really
course,
interesting.
we could change in a way that's going to reinforce that idea of I can't change. So ironically, the change becomes a continuing reinforcement. I can't change. And then things, although they won't stay the same, they will just kind of like, we're moving, but we're just moving around in a circle. Or can we recognize that actually every moment is a moment of investing in who we're going to become? That's different, by the way, from identifying an ideal self we'd like to be and then struggling to reach it, but actually giving ourselves moment by moment to practices and support systems and learnings, like deep learnings, not just intellectual learnings, so that our environment supports us to change in the way that actually we do want to change. That's real learning. That's not kind of just thinking about changing.
So I'm really interested in what you just said about, use the kind of the term, someone might be so invested in their sense of self, and
probably unconsciously.
Yeah, unconsciously. And you kind of briefly described what might make someone invest in their sense of self, and that is staying the same, although it's uncomfortable. For them, it's more comfortable to stay where they are than it is to expose them to unknown discomforts.
Initially,
yeah.
Yeah.
What else in someone's life or mind do you think would lead someone to holding on to and investing subconsciously in this sense of self, which is keeping them stuck where they are?
Well, we all do it to a degree. I would suggest, again, it's another part of being human, that it, initially feels more comfortable not to stay in our habits. That's the way we've evolved. It conserves energy. So just kind of our biological and psychological makeup, also our society, the world around us, is constructed, to kind of keep us where we are. I don't mean this in a sort of like, sort of malevolent,
Illuminati.
No, I just mean that, that's who we are as human beings. So it's not surprising that's reflected in our world. Yeah, it's kind of, it's much easier, for the status quo in that sense to continue. So, all around us, there are, incentives not to change. People don't expect people to change. And so it happens in our relationships, in our sort of family systems. I mean, to give an example, when we've most of us, like when we've left home, we become an adult and we have lots of experiences where we grow and change, but for most people, when we go home, we suddenly find ourselves acting like a 12-year-old again. And our family does the same, and suddenly it's like, what? The pressure is to go back to the dynamics that we learned early on, the environment. There are all these cues of perhaps a familiarity. So that's happening actually all the time in our lives. The cues are, they kind of encourage us perhaps unconsciously back into stasis because that seems easier. So it's not easy to change, but it is possible with steady, gentle, continuing work, with support, with practices that help. It is possible to change over the long term.
On that note, what would you say to someone who wanted to start a mindfulness journey? Where should they start?
Well, an 8-week course is a good option. It's kind of considered the gold standard in the industry because there's so much research that's been done on these types of programs. So the evidence base is good. And also 8 weeks, although it's still quite a short period of time, it's long enough to at least introduce people to the practices and for them to practice them for long enough in a supported environment. So whether that's one-to-one with a teacher or in a group. So it's like creating an environment that's different. Yeah. So kind of like the curriculum and the environment of the teaching setting kind of allows us to be in that different space, so to be supported by different cues and to have space to reflect on what comes up. And so gradually to practice these different ways so that at the end of the 8 weeks, we at least might have a sense of, is this something I want to continue with? And of course, one of the difficulties is that quite often people will have tried a bit of mindfulness, and
it didn't work for me.
It didn't work for me. Yeah. Well, not yet.
Classic.
But, behavior change doesn't come through, it's not magic. I mean, it would be wonderful if it was, isn't it? If we could all go to the gym once and be really
Yeah.
fit, or eat one healthy meal
Yeah.
and have a balanced, nutritious kind of healthy eating practice. It doesn't work like that. So at least a couple of months in a supported environment, the evidence suggests is enough to begin to facilitate these changes for most people. But it's still just a beginning. Actually, behavior change happens gradually over years, which is why, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm imagining it's just, this is, I mean, I'm not an expert in your field, but it's why I'm imagining, fad diets don't work, and
Yep.
why New Year's resolutions don't work, because it's just an idea, and there's no real sustainability.
No.
It has to become something that's sustainable, and so the rewards come over time, and then those rewards of feeling well and healthy, then reinforce back. So we develop a new environment around which feeds back into our practice, and it grows and becomes stronger over time.
Yeah, you're bang on. I think you said, it would be nice if you could flick a switch and, you do one workout and suddenly you're fit. And that's what people want because they're so focused on the goal. But really, in order to get long-term success, you need to focus more on the process and learn to enjoy the process and understand that actually this journey of behavioral change and self-improvement never ends. And if it did, life would be quite boring. If you suddenly hit peak everything, then what?
Me. Yeah. I'm now the person I always wanted to be.
Yeah. And now what? And, for me personally, this process of behavior change started when I was probably 2021, when I was, abusing drugs, alcohol, working in finance, all that kind of stuff. And over, for a lot of friends, it looks like someone flicks a switch and I've changed into who I am today. But of course, it's been a very slow, long, gradual process. And ultimately, I enjoy the process of this. And that is, I think, what people need to lean into more, is instead of focusing on this outcome of I want to be mindful, it's just learning to enjoy the process of mindfulness itself.
That's really important, actually, if I may just say one more thing about that. Because if you can enjoy the process, now that doesn't mean it's always comfortable.
No.
But if you can have a sense of fulfillment from the experience of practicing, so what you practice becomes what you love, then there's kind of no need for a sort of a voice saying, well, you should do this. Yeah. So actually the outcome is no longer the goal. It's the process of what we do is in itself fulfilling. And then you're working in the moment. You're working with, not being focused on the future, but actually living now in a way that feeds back, pleasant experiences to us. And then that helps us to feel that, this is the way we want to live. And so it becomes a sort of like a self-sustaining sort of spiral then.
Yeah. Virtuous cycle.
Yeah. So you don't need then kind of to be constantly focused on the future. So yeah, it's really important, to find a way that the process becomes what you love.
And this is what I see. And obviously, initially, people are focused on the outcomes. Then slowly but surely, they're learning to enjoy the process. And then actually learning to enjoy the process affects their identity, where they become someone who is just enjoys mindfulness and enjoys being active, enjoys eating healthily. That's just a fundamental part of who they are. And that's where the long-term change happens.
So the outcome actually is only a byproduct of investing in the process, learning how to meet the moment by moment experience in a way that enables us to find it fulfilling, even when maybe it isn't pleasant, because that learning, that kind of wisdom is coming through all the variety of our experience ones, the pleasant ones, the unpleasant ones, which is kind of just the nature of life. But learning how to find fulfillment in them then leads by itself, it seems, or is more likely to lead to happiness. There's research that says that people who are invested in happiness are less likely to be happy than those people who actually just live with what's here as well as we can, as skillfully as we can, and trust that in itself is fulfilling and will bring as much happiness as is possible.
And it's exactly what I teach my clients. They come in very heavily focused on weight loss and the number on the scale. And I lean into that at the beginning, but once they've joined, I'm like, look, we're barely going to be talking about weight loss, because weight loss is the byproduct of focusing on addressing the root cause of the issue, which is, relationship with food, identity, self-love, negative self-talk, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, wonderful. And the same is true in when I teach a mindfulness course. Often in the first session, I'll ask people to identify what they'd like to be different. So it's kind of out there and say, well, that's brilliant. Well done. That's what's got you here.
Yeah.
But actually, from now on, is it possible for a couple of months to actually let that go, to not try and achieve it, but instead to give your attention to this process of learning mindfulness? And then in a couple of months' time, let's see where we are.
Yeah.
And actually, quite often people will say, oh, that's a huge relief. You mean I
Yeah.
don't have to try to be calm? I don't have to try to relax. I don't have to try to, sleep better. I don't have to try to be less anxious. No, you just come as you are. And we're going to learn some stuff and practice some stuff that, may well help with that, but not through our trying to get to the outcome. It's a bit like, when you have kids in the car and continually saying, are we there yet? It doesn't lead to a pleasant experience.
No.
So the same way, if we're continually saying to ourselves, am I there yet? As in, am I who I want to be yet? It's going to get in the way. It's going to make us more stressed and less likely to actually get there. And anyway, where we're trying to get to is, or rather, we'll always be here.
Yeah.
If we're trying to get somewhere, we're never going to reach it. We're always going to be here. So if we can invest our attention in how we meet here skillfully, then that's going to be skillful living.
So Ed, this has been very, very interesting. I could literally talk about this subject for hours and hours and hours, but I know you have to head now. So just before we wrap up, if people did want to get in touch with you, where is the best place for that?
So you can contact me via my website, which is edhalliwell.com. All the details of the 8-week courses that I teach are at mindfulnesssussex.co.uk. Some of those are in person in Sussex, but also I run courses via Zoom, so you don't have to be local to me. Those would probably be the best ways of getting in touch, and I'd really welcome people doing so.
Yeah, so I'll link that in the description below and share it on social media as well. And just so everyone knows, that I did the remote 8-week course, and I'm also going to do like one of your retreats in December, the half-day mindfulness retreats, which I'm looking forward to. So yeah, thanks again, Ed. Thanks for taking the time to chat to us about mindfulness. I'm sure we'll be having another discussion at a later date, going into more detail of what we're talking today. But yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Lovely to be with you.